Welcome to Kaiser Watch with John Kaiser. I'm your host, Jim Goddard.
John, what's coming up on the show today?
Well, we're going to talk about the experience of Metals Investor Forum and PDAC this past week. We're going to talk about why the giving away the Ukrainian mineral rights is probably a good idea for Ukraine. And we're also going to talk about why the Toodoggone District Juniors, led by Amarc, sold off during the past week.
So what was the PDAC conference in Toronto like last week?
Well, I was first there on Friday and Saturday for the Metals Investor Forum. I gave my presentation on Friday afternoon with TDG Gold Corp and Silver North Resources and Trifecta Gold Corp. That went very well. Amarc Resources, who was in Brian London's session, also gave their presentation, which I took in. It should have been a good day, but for these companies, but Amarc happened to put out news release for that in the morning, and for some reason that triggered a sell-off. And we'll talk later about what that was all about. Attendance at Metals Investor Forum was pretty good, especially on Saturday, where people were arriving to check in for their PDAC badges and then walked over to catch the last talks of the day. But PDAC was an interesting experience. There were 27,353 people who apparently checked in and picked up their badges. It's not the highest ever, but it certainly looked busy. Now, since I just turned 65, this was the first year I qualified for the $140 Canadian all-access pass, which allows me into the technical program and a number of other things. Normally it costs $539 for PDAC members and $849 for non-members. And I haven't done that for a number of years, so I was really looking forward to taking in the technical program. Now, the technical program are specialized talks about deposits, styles, commodity talks, what's happening with copper and gold, and so on. So these are really important knowledge types events. And they had two handouts, a schedule at a glance and a 32-page booklet they called Exhibitor Listings and Floor Plans. So I grabbed them when I picked them up and started going through the schedule at a glance, and both of them, and could not find the actual breakdown of specific talks, because I obviously wasn't going to spend hours listening to every commodity talk or every porphyry talk. And no, they did not have anything listed in there. And it turns out you had to go use that QR code and drill down deep into the website to see anything. Fortunately, I had anticipated that there might be something silly like this and had checked it out in advance and printed out a bunch of pages highlighting those talks that I wanted to attend to. And then there was the newsletter program. Every Sunday for the past 25 years or so has been devoted for various number of newsletter writers. I did it for about 20 years until 2020 or so. And in the 2000s, these were extremely well attended. You would get fans would swarm you after you gave your talk. But that started to fade from about 2011, 2012 onwards. By 2020, which was the last time I did one there, the hall was like only a third filled. And so now they've moved it into the Investors Exchange. They've blocked off part of a little tucked into a corner that they call it the Investment Hub Theater. And that's where they had the newsletter writers. And then they're not really just newsletter writers anymore. They have a new term for it, which they called sort of an investment type advisor category. Anyways, I looked at the schedule at a glance, which was this 8-page fold-out, and I found only 2 inches for the technical program with only the general block, but not this breakdown of this individual talk. So that wasn't going to be easy to remember where to be at the right time. But then for the the newsletter session, they had only a half-inch devoted to it, and basically just said, investment hub theater. And Peter Bodish has been a sponsor of this from the very beginnings, and he was still a sponsor for it. And they didn't even bother to put his name into the sponsor category. So I thought, well, even though I'm not presenting there, I wanted to know who was presenting and see if I should sit in on any of them, because these people often have very interesting ideas that are worth paying attention to. Well, I had no idea how to find that, so I approached one of the PDAC information desks and asked, why don't you have this information in here? And they mumbled something about sustainability type of thing, and I said, well, how come you have way more space devoted to sustainability and the indigenous programs? And they just kind of shrugged. So my sense is that the PDAC that really doesn't get it. It's still completely focused on the whole First Nation issue. At the beginning of any of the technical talks, they would have the acknowledgement that we are all losers occupying First Nations ancestral territory. And even the opening talk, the opening ceremony, the First Nation speaker they had spent a fair bit of time reminding everybody that we're occupying their ancestral land. And clearly, PDAC, all these people are not reading the room, because this was a week when everybody was worked up about the antics on Friday with Trump and Vance humiliating Zelensky, having a big tirade as he's trying to figure out how Ukraine can be solved from being absorbed by Russia, and of course with the threat of the tariffs to be imposed on Tuesday. These tariffs will hurt Canada a lot more than they will hurt the United States, and it will still hurt the United States. So everybody was up in arms talking about that. And one of the senses that I also picked up is that the First Nation groups, they've been a big part of the problem in the past decade. They've been hijacked by the NGOs such as Mining Watch Canada. Their goal is to block any sort of mine development in Canada. And when Justin Trudeau signed UNDRIP and started this reconciliation business and elevated the First Nations to 3% of Canada's population to some sort of DNA-based aristocracy, all of a sudden everything seemed to grind to a halt. Consultations took forever. Exploration permitting took forever. And it's done a lot of damage to the resource exploration sector. But what we're starting to pick up is that this thuggish behavior of Trump towards Canada is serving as a big wake-up call. And even the First Nations groups, they're looking at this and thinking, this guy might be serious about invading Canada and turning us all into conquered people, in which case none of us have any rights. And Canada's mineral potential is a really key part for preserving the democracy principles of the global West. So a vibe I picked up was a lot of First Nations groups are thinking, okay, we gotta pull up a chair at the table with these mining and exploration people, figure out where it's truly a bad idea to explore because there is an actual sacred or spiritual aspect to it. But let's figure out how we can actually have stuff happening, get these resources developed, have meaningful jobs for our community. So that was an interesting vibe that was being picked up. And but as far as the PDAC is concerned, they're still totally obsessed with trying to please First Nations and didn't quite sense that, hey, it's time to become more supportive of the mining industry. And what was the message that they were sending to the whole mining and exploration community by hiding the technical program details inside a website rather than having them printed out? Well, I think they were kind of signaling that the mining group doesn't really matter. And what message were they sending to the investors who, they may pay $25 a day to attend a Sunday session, where they completely hide hide the breakdown of who's speaking when on Sunday. What message are they sending? Well, I think they're sending the message that investors don't matter either. Only their First Nations and sustainability obsessions seem to matter for the PDAC. And that this has been a problem for the past few years. And even the stuff, let's save some money. I mean, if everybody did what I did and printed out a whole bunch of paper to just so I can look at it quickly, where should I be next for next program, the next talk, we would have wasted way more paper than if they just added a page to the schedule of the glance and add these important parts to it and not waste all the space on all these other things that most people aren't particularly interested in. So kind of penny wise, pound foolish. But that wasn't the worst in terms of penny wise, pound foolish. Usually on Sunday, I go to the trade show and I visit all the geological surveys. The trade show is that part where the service providers, the drilling companies, assay companies, and the different government agencies, the provincial geological surveys, country geological surveys. This is where they all are. And one of my favorites to visit is the U.S. Geological Survey, which has a long and important history supporting mining and exploration and information about the mining sector going back to 1930. And so I finally wander over to the part of the trade show where they are, and what do I find? I find a big, wide, empty table. Nobody there. Apparently, they have been a victim of the Doge Masters' cost-cutting exercises, forbidden to travel, and all the other countries' geological surveys are there. The only one that wasn't there was Zimbabwe. It was there last year, but they have proven so useless. They have been unable to grant a single license under their new mining law that I guess they decided, well, we're not going to embarrass ourselves by being here and pretending we're actually open for business. But everybody else is there. It's knowledge exchange. It's an important presence. And here's this empty booth. But the worst of it is, then I heard from others that in the prior week, there was the SME conference in Denver, and this is a very important mining conference. This is highly technical. They even published the abstracts of the talks that they give, and there's hundreds of talks. Well, apparently all the ones given by the supposed to be given by the government agencies, they were all no-shows. No money allowed. You're not allowed to spread information. And this is like insane. The biggest problem facing America is its metal supply dependency on places like China and Russia and other parts of the world. It's the biggest economy. It's a $28 trillion economy, and yet it supplies domestically produces only a portion of the metals that it needs. And it's incredible that Chainsaw Musk has been focusing on destroying government agencies that represent only 14% of the $7 trillion federal budget. If he were truly serious about doing anything like it, he would be tackling the 68% of federal spending that goes towards the elderly, the poor, and the sick. And how could they justify that? Well, you could use principles of efficiency. The elderly who are not spending accumulated wealth are no longer productive members of society. The poor are poor because they lack merit, as a result of which they are also not productive. The sick are sick because they have bad genes or habits, as a result of which they also cannot contribute much to society. Nearly $5 trillion is spent keeping them alive with no return. The budget could easily be balanced by simply eliminating funding for Social Security, health, Medicare, and income security, which would accelerate the demise of these unproductive members of the society. This, however, is not what voters had in mind when they endorsed Trump's promise to make America great again. And there is also the $1.8 trillion spent on interest in national defense. And they can't do much about the interest, but Putin did helpfully suggest that he would reduce Russia's $100 billion defense budget by 50% if America would do the same for its $900 billion defense budget. Now, the problem with all this talk about cutting, all this government spending is that America's GDP consists primarily of services, and keeping unlucky Americans alive and well is a huge source of employment for people who are not retired, sick, or poor. What are they going to do when they get fired? And also maintaining America's military superiority employs an awful lot of people. And when you consider that also those people involved in providing technology and hardware, which is actually physical stuff, that's an additional amount. So chopping this federal deficit in a meaningful way, it really can't be done without unleashing a major recession, a downturn on the United States. Now, it's an example of, penny-wise, the new penny-wise, pound-foolish face of America. They should be focusing on all the knowledge sectors, enhancing that. And in terms of exploration and development, the USGS should be present at a conference to encourage companies and investors. Yes, the United States is a good place to explore for metals. And we're going to do something about the deny and delay attitude of the U.S. Forest Service and the BLM. We're going to find these deposits in the United States. But in terms of the mood at the PDAC, it was interesting. When people engaged each other, there would be this sort of feeling around, where do you stand on anything? And it's not like all Canadians are anti-Trumpers. There are also plenty of Trumpers amongst the Canadians. And it was kind of interesting. It reminded me a lot of that 1978 movie with Donald Sutherland, The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and you would be talking to a person, and then you would see that word sorrow slip in there, and all of a sudden you realize, oh no, it's one of them. And that priceless scene of Donald Sutherland making that high-pitched scream when he sees the person who isn't yet somebody who's had their mind snatched. That was kind of what it was like walking around and interacting with people at the PDAC this year.
What do you think about Trump's demand for Ukraine's mineral rights?
Trump's insistence that Ukraine hand over its mineral rights kind of, I think, explains why he has so many bankruptcies in his career. There doesn't seem to be any economic sense in his brain. So I have taken the U.S. Geological Survey data going back to 1930. I've compiled it, manually copied a lot of the old stuff. I've been able to produce various graphics showing who produces different metals. I also produce a set of charts which shows how what each country produces in about 50 different categories, which includes both metals and fossil fuels. And these are very, very revealing in terms of each country's potential. Now, I've put together 4 of them, one for Canada, one for the United States, one for the Russia, and one for China. But I also did one for Ukraine. Now, when you compare, say, Canada and Ukraine, you say, okay, kind of looks similar type of thing. But then you realize the scale on the Canada one for percent goes all the way to 100. Ukraine's only goes to 10%. When you look at what they produce, it's like iron ore and manganese are 2 little spikes that go up to 3%. There's a couple spikes for titanium and zirconium that go 1 to 2%. These are obviously a mineral sands deposit. And there's a 0.2% blip for uranium. And you ask yourself, what is going on here? Why is Trump obsessed with Ukraine's mineral wealth? It doesn't make any sense, because if there were any mineral wealth worth developing, it would have been developed a long time ago. Yes, there was mining done during the Soviet era, but that was done, for example, the Softy-Vody mine, which was an iron or a uranium and a scandium mine together. The mines were basically operated at break-even by the Soviets because they needed these metals, and the downstream value was far more important than losing money or not making any money on those operations. So if I can understand why Zelensky's kind of hopeful that Trump might do a deal where you pay us back with your mineral wealth and we'll support you and kick the Russians out and allow you to rebuild your country. Because if Russia does disappear from the scene, we know Russia isn't going to do any war reparations, fix any of the damage they did to Ukraine's infrastructure. That's going to be Ukraine's priority is to rebuild its infrastructure. So what about developing new deposits? Well, who's going to put up the capex for it? And who will put up capex? If you look at the China price-driven revenue side of the equation and compare that to the OPEX, and you see that that's a negative money, who's going to put up the capex? Now, Zelensky, if the money comes from elsewhere, that's fine. If it runs at break even or even at a loss, that's fine. It creates jobs for his people and keeps Trump happy. But where's the capital supposed to come from? And the payback, where's the cash flow? There's not going to be any cash flow. Plus, nobody's bothered to do any exploration in Ukraine since the Soviet Union collapsed. So you'd have to spend several years just to delineate systems, and then you'd probably discover, they all die in the China price, just like deposits in most of the world die thanks to the China price. And this is where, like Trump just doesn't get it, doesn't get the nature of America's problem. America's problem is that Russia and China dominate the metal supply, and but China dominates it even more than Russia, and it sets the price, and it, as a sort of semi-communist nation, it runs these projects at break even. For example, rare earths, it doesn't need to make money mining rare earths because it controls 98% of the downstream magnet industry that it ships to the rest of the world. That's where it makes its profit, downstream. And so it keeps these prices so low that nobody else in the rest of the world who has to follow the profit mandate can get anything into production. Now, in terms of, for Canada, you look at Canada, its land mass is about 17 times that of Ukraine. It's about 4 times that of Greenland, but Greenland doesn't count because the majority of its land mass is covered by ice, and you can't find or mine anything through that. Russia is the biggest one. It's about 70% bigger than Canada, and Canada's a little bit bigger than China. But when you look at Canada's distribution of various metals, it's a pretty impressive distribution. They produce something of almost everything, and it's up to some of the 20-30%. But it's comparable to Russia, though Russia's supply is higher, and it has a little bit more diversity of supply than Canada. But Canada has the potential to produce most metals other than like bauxite needed for to make aluminum. It's there. That potential is there. But in the past decade, Canada has neglected this sector. It's let itself fall into this First Nations anti-mining NIMBY trap and said, okay, we're this group of people that are dependent on the United States. They are our friends. We can make our country not an important player in the grand scheme of things. But now things are changing because Canada really is the solution to America's metal import vulnerability. And again, one of the things I think that will come out of this PDAC is a determination to mobilize Canada's exploration, get development going. As I mentioned earlier, the First Nations are waking up and saying, we need to be part of the solution, not the problem that keeps the solution from happening. So Trump's bluster is actually turning out to be a positive thing. And also, in terms of the whole global West, Europe, and so on, Canada can help preserve the principles of democracy by producing these metals that these nations need, which are right now getting them from China, which is exploiting its overwhelming supply advantage, and it's turning that into a weapon against the global West. So as an example of Trump may not last. I mean, his goal seems to be to turn America into an autocracy of some sort, similar to Russia or China, but he may disappear and democracy may be preserved, but it won't last very long if China and Russia continue to dominate in metal supply. So Canada's role in metal supply is absolutely crucial, and so I think this will be an interesting next year as we see what happens in Canada and its exploration potential. I'd like to see the United States wake up too and focus on let's make mining and exploration welcome in the United States, and not yap about we can make friends with Putin and then Russia will supply us everything that we need, so we don't need to roll up our sleeves and do this at home. If anybody actually believes that Putin is going to become a true pal of America, they really need their head examined.
Why did Amarc Resources and other Toodoggone District juniors sell off this past week?
Well, this group had two sell-offs. The first happened on Friday when Amarc released the last results for its Joy project in the Toodoggone District of British Columbia. Now, this project's joint ventured with Freeport. Freeport can earn up to 70%, but first it needs to spend a couple more $1 million on its $35 million commitment to go to 60%, and then it needs to make a decision as to whether to spend another $75 million over 5 years to gain an extra 10%. And the market's looking at the scale of everything. The main part of the exploration at the $33 million went into the Pine, Mex, Twin Canyon area. The grades are generally low copper grade, low gold grade, not really up to snuff for what a Freeport wants. Aurora, however, was different. It was a late season discovery. They had 3 rigs going on it to drill as many holes as they could. And this thing is phenomenal because the copper grades are more than double what is typical for the Toodoggone region, in particular chemist deposits, of which there are about 1 billion tons of 0.2% to 0.4% copper and 0.4 to 0.6 gram per ton gold. What they delivered at the Aurora discovery was gold grades in the 1 to 4 gram per ton range and copper grades ranging sort of 0.3 to 0.6%. So this is over 5 times better for the gold potential. And from what I can see, what's published, there's easily 5 to 10 million ounces of gold present at what would even work as underground mineable grades. And that is what enabled the stock to take off earlier this year. Well, this last batch of results, it did extend to the south, the zone of this high-grade mineralization, but the market didn't seem to care about that. It looked at the more outlying holes like number 78, which was to the north, and they looked at a batch in 64, 66, 69, which all came back insignificant results. Now, those holes are like a kilometer from the guts of this system, where we have these fantastic holes that suggest the 150 to 200 million ton body of mineralization. So the part of what the market has been sort of focused on is the plan view of the IP anomaly, which really reflects chargeability, which has to do with pyrite and not so much the chalcopyrite, which is the copper mineralization. And the market saw this big giant sort of 1.5 kilometer wide by 3 kilometer long IP anomaly. And when it saw those southern ones come up empty, it immediately thought, this thing is constrained. and then there was a hole to the west, number 77. It was had only a short interval of so-so mineralization. That helped TDG sell off, because that seemed to suggest, this thing that appears to be trending east-west manages to stop at the border. And Finlay didn't benefit from hole number 78, which was to the north, just in the corner of the project. It came up also with insignificant results. And because the company bundled the rest of the results from the Pine, Mex area, which were the usual low grade 0.1, 0.2% copper and 0.2, 0.3 gram per ton gold, the market kind of perceived, why they gave us the last of the Aurora results and then all this other stuff. Are they, kind of signaling that the Aurora discovery is not as good as the market originally thought? And, one can argue whether or not that's legitimate. A big concern being that even if there's a couple 100 million tons at Aurora, that's really not big enough for Freeport, so maybe they're just going to stop at 60% when they vest and not move this along very quickly. But you could look at it another way. One reason to emphasize all this low-grade mineralization in the eastern part of the property is you're obviously going to develop the Aurora zone first, which is going to spin huge cash flow, by which point copper prices may be a lot stronger than they are now, and they may have drilled deeper in this other area, because there's potential that these copper gold systems, when you go deeper, you have this sort of pencil porphyry effect that you have with red Chris, where grades actually get better at depth. So there's an enormous mass of copper gold mineralization already there. By itself, it wasn't going to be good enough to keep Freeport interested, but Aurora allows all of it to become a strategic asset. So with the market thinking, it's going back to being about the Pine area, they may have thought that and be negative because of that, but I don't think that's really the way to look at it. As far as the main area is concerned, the hole to the west, it turns out that the one at the very edge of the property, they had 3 rigs going there. One of the crews managed to get COVID, so that hole was stopped, and they were never able to finish it. So, it was just getting into mineralization, and who knows what would have happened. So this hole does not actually indicate cutoff to the west. So TDG Gold Corp is still in the running to have some sort of extension of this, and they will have to go in there in May at the same time that Amarc goes in there and start drilling. Now, but even within this big IP anomaly, there could be many clusters of high-grade mineralization. So the market to sort of think, okay, just because the step-outs didn't work, that's it, what we see is what we're going to get. It's not going to grow. That's a false assumption. This is just getting going, and as they start putting a lot more holes into the Aurora discovery, we will see a lot more zones emerge, and they don't really understand the geometry, because at the base there's a barren intrusion, which how it relates to the existing mineralization is not very clear at all. In terms of TDG Gold Corp, they were in my session. There's a great backstage interview that I did with Fletcher Morgan, and they completely understand that what this means is you start stepping to the north along the eastern flank, you are going to find copper gold systems related to the epithermal gold systems to the west. That's going to repeat over and over. Finlay Minerals has the same east-west structures between the Saunders and Pillar Faults on its property, so it's going to become an important play. And when I talked to Diane Nicholson, she pretty much acknowledged that there is an east-west trend here. It's really important, and one of the reasons they acquired the Brenda property is that in the western part, where there are these Hazelton group rocks, which are the younger rocks, not as permissive for mineralization, yet which in the Aurora zone have very good mineralization. All of this needs to be re-examined at depth. So I attended the Jim Lang talk on Sunday, I believe it was Sunday, where he kind of put everything into context and didn't actually learn an awful lot more, but they are realizing that these areas that have been obscured by these Hazelton Group rocks above the Takla volcanics, and that's where these Black Lake intrusions have taken place, that porphyry systems are possible. It is time to try and peer through these Hazelton rocks and see what's underneath, because the Aurora system is actually quite high. Other parts which have been uplifted and eroded away, there's really not much more to find in those areas. But in these other areas where the Hazelton volcanics are hiding what's underneath, that's the area, that's the new exploration frontier for the whole Toodoggone District Rethink play. And I think Finlay Minerals, TDG Gold Corp, and Amarc Resources, where they are sitting now, in the 40s for Amarc and TDG and back below a dime for Finlay. These are excellent prices for speculators to get in there and get positioned for when drilling resumes in May. Now, part of the market reaction is, okay, there's negative reactions. There's not going to be anything more for the next 3 months, so we'll go away and wait for later. Well, because of the severity of this reaction, this creates a fresh opportunity for investors to get meaningful positions in what's maybe, at least for now, looks like the biggest emerging story in British Columbia.
John, thanks for the update.
You're welcome, Jim.
We've been talking with John Kaiser. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on Kaiser Watch are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as a recommendation to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at kaiserresearch.com.